There's a type of person who walks into a garage, sees an old motorcycle covered in dust, and doesn't see junk. They see something alive. They don't think it. They feel it. Something inside them recognizes that machine, like they've ridden it before. Like that rusted engine is somehow a part of who they are. And the strange thing is, that person could afford something new. Something with a touchscreen, with riding modes, with a warranty. But they don't, and the question nobody asks is, why? Today, we're not really talking about motorcycles. Or rather, we're using motorcycles to talk about something that goes much deeper. Because the old bike isn't the real subject here. The real subject is you. More specifically, the way your mind is built. Because choosing a machine that's old, imperfect, that needs constant attention, that could break down at any moment, that's not a purchasing decision. That's a statement of identity. And psychology has spent decades studying exactly this kind of choice. What we're going to look at today is what's behind that decision. What it says about how you process the world. What it reveals about how you relate to risk, to control, to freedom. And by the end, you might understand something about yourself that you've never quite been able to put into words. Cognitive psychologists talk about something called the architecture of thought. The way your brain organizes reality, the shortcuts it uses, the mental frameworks it applies to every new situation. And what most people don't realize is that certain activities, certain repeated experiences, have the ability to reshape that architecture. Not dramatically, not overnight, but slowly, quietly, the way water gradually reshapes stone. Riding an old motorcycle is one of those experiences. Not because it's dangerous, not because it's fast, but because it demands that you be fully present. Completely, with no way out. When that machine has been around for decades, and you're responsible for keeping it alive, something in your perception shifts. You start seeing the world differently. You start noticing what others overlook. And that way of processing your surroundings transfers, without you even realizing it, to everything else in your life. There's a concept in psychology called locus of control. It's the belief you hold, often unconsciously, about who or what determines what happens to you. People with an internal locus of control believe, deep down, that they shape their own path. People with an external locus feel like things simply happen to them. What's fascinating is that choosing an old motorcycle and maintaining it continuously activates that internal locus. Every breakdown you fix, every mile you complete on a machine that could have quit, reinforces a very specific message in your mind. I'm capable. I've got this. But there's more. Research on decision-making under risk shows that people who voluntarily choose to live with a certain level of uncertainty and don't avoid it but manage it, develop a unique kind of tolerance. They don't become reckless. They become calm. They learn to distinguish between real risk and perceived risk. And in a world that constantly overwhelms us with false alarms and manufactured urgency, that's an extraordinary skill to have. And then there's mindfulness, not the app version, not the guided breathing kind. Real, raw mindfulness, like the kind you can't fake. When you're going 60 miles an hour on a machine with nothing between you and the road, your mind cannot be somewhere else. It can't be at work, on social media, replaying a conversation from yesterday. It's here, right now, in every curve, every vibration, every sound from the engine. That's pure presence. And when the brain practices that kind of presence repeatedly, it changes. So, what kind of person comes out of all this? What traits get forged when someone chooses to live with a machine that's imperfect, loud, and demanding? First, real independence. Not the kind you post about. The kind you practice in silence, alone on a road, when something breaks and you have to figure it out yourself. That person learns that they don't need the environment to be controlled in order to feel secure. They learn to find stability from within. Second, confidence that's earned, not given. The self-assurance that comes from having overcome real difficulties is qualitatively different from the kind built on other people's approval. Whoever keeps an old bike running accumulates small daily victories that nobody else sees. And that private stockpile of wins changes how they show up in the world. Third, a healthy relationship with imperfection. We live in an era obsessed with new, flawless, and instant. The person who chooses something old, something with history, something with scars, has a different relationship with imperfection. They're not afraid of it, they accept it. And that inevitably carries over into how they handle their own mistakes, into how they treat the mistakes of others. But there's something beyond psychology, beyond neuroscience, something that belongs to a different kind of language. Some people can recall with startling clarity the first time they rode a motorcycle. Not the model, not the speed, the feeling, the wind, the light of that particular afternoon, the solitude filled with sound. Some people associate their bike with turning points in their lives, with big decisions, with versions of themselves they no longer are, but still carry with warmth. The motorcycle becomes a container of identity, an object that holds who we are or who we once wanted to be. And when that bike is old, when it has its own history, that symbolic weight multiplies. It's not just your story anymore, it's also the story of someone who came before. Someone who also chose that machine, who also sat where you sit, who also stared down that same stretch of road. There's a silent conversation across generations that happens when someone rescues an old motorcycle. And that conversation, never spoken out loud, gives the experience a dimension that nothing new can ever offer. The freedom that person feels isn't just physical. It's not just the movement. It's the freedom to be, for a while, the most authentic version of themselves, without roles, without expectations, without the pressure to perform. And this is where it all comes together. Choosing an old motorcycle is, at its core, adopting a philosophy. A philosophy that says control doesn't come from eliminating uncertainty. It comes from learning to live inside it. That freedom isn't the absence of obstacles, but the ability to move through them anyway. That the real value of something has nothing to do with its price, its warranty, or what anyone else thinks of it. It's a philosophy that says, I'd rather have something imperfect that's truly mine than something perfect that never will be. And that's a way of facing chaos. The chaos of the world, the chaos of life, the chaos inside that we all carry, and that most of us spend years trying to ignore. The person who rides an old machine and keeps it running has figured out that chaos isn't defeated by looking away. It's negotiated. It's managed. You learn to live alongside it, and that skill, once learned on the road, doesn't stay on the road. If you've made it this far and something you've heard has landed, this channel is probably for you. We're not here to talk about things. We're here to talk about the people behind things, the psychology hidden in small decisions, in the objects we choose, in the roads we take. If you want to keep exploring that territory, you know what to do. And if you haven't yet, do it now, because the next video goes even further in. In the end, we all choose our discomforts. The question is whether we choose them consciously, or whether they just happen to us. The person who chooses an old motorcycle has made that choice. They've said, in their own way, I'd rather have a life that demands my attention than a life that simply passes. I'd rather have something that challenges me than something that protects me from everything. And that has nothing to do with motorcycles. It has to do with how a person is built, with what kinds of experiences shape character, with what relationship you choose to have with difficulty, with uncertainty, with the things you can't control. Maybe the old bike isn't a quirk. Maybe it's an answer. An answer to a world that keeps offering more comfort in exchange for less presence. More automation in exchange for less participation. More guarantees in exchange for less risk one and also less life. What's the old motorcycle in your life? What imperfect, demanding, hard-to-explain thing have you chosen? And why can't you imagine your life without it? Leave it in the comments. I'm more curious than you think.